In Unit 2, the third main topic is 6/4 chords, and I want to emphasize that this really ties into embellishing chords because they're always embellishing in function. They're not going to be they're not going to bear one of those main functions like tonic, dominant, or predominant. They're always going to embellish other chords. Usually they're flankers. So in this case, we're going to start with passing. Let me list these before we get going here. Passing, cadential, pedal, and arpeggiating. Those are the three kinds of 6/4 chords. You know what, we usually learn these in Theory 1 as just yet another inversion. Just almost on a par with 6/3 position chords, in other words, first inversion. But the truth is that they are so unstable that they're tipsy. I like to think of it kind of like this. If you've got a 6, boy, I never can quite, I don't know if that's right exactly. I think so. I might reverse that. That's a 6/4. It's a top that's just, it needs to be between other things. Like, here's that's root position, 5/3 position. They're solid, they're stable. You can see. Okay. And then let's do 6/3. If 5/3 is super stable, then 6/3 is close, but it's still moving a bit. But a 6/4 is always ready to just collapse. It's gonna fall down. It is highly unstable. So don't think of it as just another inversion. Think of it as so unstable that it's always going to have to get propped up by other chords that surround it and lend it some degree of stability. We're going to talk about all four of these. We'll start with the passing. You know, the main place for this, let's think in C, is actually between scale degrees 6 and 4. So in C major, I could move from scale degree 6 to 4 through a G. And I'm picking this context because it's really common. I could also have picked C moving up to E, say, and put a passing chord in between a couple tonic chords, 1 and 1/6, say. That's common too, but let me demonstrate with another even more common situation. And that's when we're dealing with a 4 chord. Starting out the way I've written it, I've got it starting out in inversion and ending up in root position. And in between it, we've got a chord that I'm going to make into a 6/4 chord. You can think of that as the chordal fifth, and if that's true, then the root is C. And I'll write a 1/6/4 then as the middle chord. Lots of times this happens with a voice exchange, so you end up with this kind of pattern in the other parts. You can run this forward or backwards, and you can go this way as well. Start from the 4 in root position and move to the first inversion. We said they're always embellishing, and how do we label all embellishing chords? It's by their bass motion. So here's passing motion through the 6/4 chord. That's passing. And I can't say what is being embellished here, but if, let's say I had a 5 here, then I would clarify and I would know that that's probably dominant. And if that's true, this is definitely a predominant. For sure, with this 6/4 wedged in between these two chords, it's going to be passing no matter what the overall context might be, whether this is plagal or predominant, because of that passing motion in the bass. Let me mention too, when you go to write this, let's say we're filling in some inner parts here, it's I've set it up such that it's easy to write this with the correct doubling because the outer parts already have the bass note doubled. But remember this, when you write it, no matter what's in the top part, the normal doubling for a 6/4 is to double the chordal fifth, the bass note. So in a 6/4 chord, double the bass note. whatever's in the bass, and you think, normally you don't double the chordal fifth. You can, but you don't have to. Here you really need to, not the root. We're used to thinking double the root, at least that's what I was told. And that will not serve you well in this case. You need to double the chordal fifth, the bass note. Let's look at a cadential 6/4. These are probably the most common of all. So we've seen a load of them. If we're sticking with C major, we come at it like this. Notice the bass note happens and the 6/4 accompanies it. And then the resolution happens over top of that same bass note. Now this doesn't always have to happen at a cadence, but it often does. It could be that this is the end of a phrase, a half cadence. It could be right before the arrival of a one chord, if a one were to come here. That'd be some kind of authentic cadence. They happen a lot at cadences, but they don't have to. They can occur elsewhere. So it just gets its name because it happens so frequently there, but it's not as if they all have to happen at a cadence. That's why it's important to know what determines that it's really cadential. What is it about the motion in the bass that makes this a cadential 6/4? Let me show you what a pedal would do. You could still do this, but you'd need to put the 6/4 in the middle between two root position chords. At least that's the most typical way to flank it, with two that are root position. The important thing here is the position of the 6/4 with respect to the bass note. Notice that in the cadential 6/4, the 6/4 starts with that bass note. It accompanies the start of that bass note. But in a pedal 6/4, this is a pedal over here, the pedal tone already was there. It preceded the start of the 6/4. So a big difference. In a pedal 6/4, the 6/4 occurs after the bass note has already sounded, the sustained bass note. But in a cadential 6/4, the 6/4 accompanies the very start of the sustained bass note. That's a big difference. I'm used to writing these like this, as showing one Roman numeral for the pair of them. That says to me that this is a 4/3 suspension. This is decorative. The 6/4 is not a main chord, it's just embellishing. Even from the get-go, from here, with this Roman numeral, I can see that. Let's see how that looks. I'll just write out some upper parts here. Okay, so here I've got a note that's sustained in, or retained in this soprano part. That's the fourth above the bass. And now it needs to resolve. So when you write in a cadential 6/4, that fourth above the bass, its normal resolution, the one that you should use, is to go down by step. Treat it like a suspension, even if it's not prepared that way. Let's say this were a 2 chord and it's not a suspension at all. You're still going to go down when you resolve. So take the fourth down by step. We had a 4 chord though originally, and I'll just stick with that. Okay, now we just need to get everybody else going where they need to go. Now can you see why this symbol makes sense? You hear this chord, predominant, moving to the dominant. It's just that some of these notes, their resolutions have been delayed. And especially that fourth, it's nice to show it as a 4-3 because it shows how that dissonance resolves. That's not a chord tone, that is, as in any suspension. Okay, now I will also accept this sort of thing where you do that. I'm okay with that, but at some level you have to show that this 1-6-4 resolves. And that the main thing is that it's a dominant chord. Now here's what I'll do. Say, okay, I've got my predominant, there's my dominant, and I'm embellishing that dominant with a cadential 6/4. See how it follows the model? We say, here's the main function, Any chord that doesn't seem to fit, obviously that function needs a label to show how it's embellishing. You can use CAD to explain that it's a cadential 6/4. It's embellishing the dominant in this particular way we've been laying out. So I see the main functions, but I don't show this as a return to tonic because that is no resolution. I don't show plagal. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to go, that's a plagal chord going to a tonic. See, that just doesn't work. This is not a return to the stability of tonic. Scratch that and do this instead. That's very important. This makes it really clear from the get-go. Even the Roman numerals show that's predominant going to the dominant. Pretty clean cut. Either one's fine, but make sure that if you do this, you show the 1/6/4 as embellishing the dominant by being a cadential 6/4. And CAD period will serve to express that. Okay, here's the pedal 6/4, and usually it's really simple. You might have it like so, and it just involves a little wiggling motion up top. Oops, I wrote it here already. Let me get that off there. Okay, G. Okay, here's the 6/4, and then back again to the G major chord. So here's root position G, B, D, and it comes back to the same exact notes. In the middle is the 6/4. You can see the wiggle here, the neighboring motion going on. And so some people name this chord a neighboring 6/4. The reason I don't like that, and the reason I write pedal, or abbreviated like so, the reason I write that instead is because we label all our embellishing chords by their bass motion. This involves no motion in the bass surrounding that 6/4, so its embellishment, if I talk of it as a neighbor, I'm having to jump up here and look at the upper parts. The neighboring motion is there, not in the bass. But the bass is just a pedal tone. To be consistent, I say whatever this is, let's say this is dominant, that's the main chord going. And this is embellishing by pedal motion. In other words, no motion. So focus on the bass. If we use this instead of neighboring, we can be completely consistent and always use the bass motion to label the embellishing chord. Notice what we're doubling in all these cases: the bass note, the bass note, and the bass note. Always double the bass note in the 6/4. Your fourth above the bass needs to resolve. Now sometimes it's just going to stick because it can't move down, but when you can, you resolve it down by step, especially here with the cadential and the pedal. Arpeggiating happens a lot, but we hardly ever actually label it. It'd be like this. Say I have a tonic chord, and wherever I might be moving, maybe I'm going to a 2-chord across a bar line, and I just want to enliven the bass a bit. If I jump down a quarter leap to the chordal fifth, root to fifth, then I've created a 6/4. A lot of times we would just say, okay, that's my tonic, and be done with it. But if we're given some sort of prominence, we could write arpeggiating 6/4 into there. Most of the time, though, you don't even write that. You just leave it and say, you know what, that's my tonic chord, and I'm embellishing a little bit in the bass by moving through the chord. But in other words, you don't need to necessarily label it unless you're really being particular for one reason or another, want to emphasize the fact that that is an embellishment. Then you can write arp under there, but it is not necessary. All it means that you're doing is you've leapt in the bass to the chordal fifth. By doing that, you're moving through the chord, and so it's called an arpeggiating 6/4. All right, so we've covered the 4 main kinds of 6/4 chord, and the labels you use the most are, well, definitely first off is cadential. That happens a lot. A lot of passing 6/4s. A good number of pedal 6/4s. And then no matter how many of these there are, maybe because there are so many, I don't know, we don't tend to label the arpeggiating. Depends on the style. Classical music, you're not going to have a whole lot of these coming up about. But if you know a popular song, like songs off Broadway, a lot of times the bass moves in that way. Marches sometimes do that, moving between the root and the fifth a lot, just to keep time. But again, you probably won't even use the label for it. Two main things to remember. In these contexts, the fourth above the bass needs to resolve. Sometimes you'll be able to keep it. That's fine. But when you can, resolve it down by step. And the other main thing, doubling. Double the bass note. It is the most stable thing going on. The others, the 6 and the 4, have to resolve, especially the fourth.